Everybody ready? Yeah, okay. All right, well, thank you all for being here today. I very much appreciate it. This is our second presentation about Hurry-Scurry. Today we have Matt from Somerset Place. Before we begin today, though, I would like to ask a question about what today is. Does anybody know what today is? Juneteenth. Does anybody know the importance of Juneteenth?
Texas.
You, sir.
Oh, you're picking on me.
I'm picking on you, yes, sir.
Juneteenth, I guess that occurred in Texas, and it was maybe 2 years after the Civil War had ended. But they were still treating black folks in Texas, in that part of Texas, like slaves. So I guess representatives of the Union Army went into that part of Texas and reminded them that slaves had been emancipated. And that was approximately June 19th, I think, when that occurred.
June 19th, 1865. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The reason why I'm bringing that up and the reason why I think it's important to talk about is the story of Hurry-Scurry and Somerset Place. Somerset Place was technically emancipated in 1863 when the Union troops came down and the Burnside expedition began. Josiah Collins split up his enslaved community. The healthy, the young, and some of the children were forcibly migrated here to Franklin County. And the older, less active members of his enslaved community stayed back in Somerset Place. The community that came here to Franklin County, they were not freed from enslavement until May of 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. When that had happened, in May of 1865, they eventually went back to Somerset Place and they were reunited with their families. That is why today is an important day, and that's why I chose to talk about Hurry-Scurry and the story of Hurry-Scurry on this day. That's why it is an important day that we do discuss and we keep in our dialogue. With that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Matt. And the way that it is going to go down is that we're going to talk about the story of Somerset Place from its foundation all the way up to the Civil War. And then we're going to pass it back to me. And I'm going to talk about Hurry-Scurry, its history, and eventually the archaeology of it and what we found so far. Sound good to everybody?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Zach. Well, my name is Matt. I'm one of the historical interpreters at Somerset Place. Somerset Place was a very large plantation and planter's estate that was located in southeastern Washington County. You can skip this one. I'm going to start the Lake Company. Located in southeastern Washington County on the northern shore of Lake Phelps. Lake Phelps was a natural freshwater lake, still is in North Carolina. And the Somerset Place plantation, before it was a plantation, it was part of a much broader forested swamp that was in that region of our state. And so it starts off in the year 1785. And that year, three very wealthy men from the town of Edenton, who a year earlier had formed a business together called the Lake Company. You can skip to the next one. Maybe go back. Sorry. Okay, there you go. Sorry, I got it myself. But the Lake Company consisted of these three gentlemen. They acquired about 110,000 acres of this densely forested swamp. This is a massive, massive land acquisition. Although only about 5,000 of those acres were ever fully cultivated during the plantation era. Now, the three men were Josiah Collins I, Nathaniel Allen, and Dr. Samuel Dickinson. What they wanted to do, obviously, make is a plantation on this property. And so to start this plantation, the Lake Company assembled a labor force consisting of 200 workers, with the majority of these workers being enslaved. The Lake Company, for instance, purchased a group of 80 Africans and forcibly brought them from Africa right here into North Carolina. They arrived in Edenton. The Lake Company also acquired a group of 81 enslaved African Americans. These individuals were at least first generation born in the United States during the colonies at the time. These individuals, they were already living in and around the town of Edenton, which is, again, is on the northern side of the Albemarle Sound. So they were already living in and around the town of Edenton before having to come out to the swamps in Washington County. Lastly, the Lake Company hired various free workers. These individuals tend to serve in specialized roles like surveyors and overseers. I think you can skip there. Now, enslaved workers at Somerset, during the early phase, they were forced to not only clear trees and vegetation from this forested swamp, they also had to dig a 6-mile long canal. They dug this canal from 1786 until 1788. Of course, they're digging this canal by hand. They were forced to dig the canal starting at the Scuppernong River, which is the main river north of Somerset Place. And they basically cut the canal through this swamp until it connected with Lake Phelps, which is south of the Scuppernong. And this would be one of a series of canals that were dug on the lands on north of Lake Phelps, many of which the Collins owned. But this canal was known as the transportation canal. It did several functions for the plantation. It slowly drained the surrounding land of water, making the land livable and farmable. This canal also provided a source of water transportation. With the canal filled up with water, enslaved people that would ferry flatboats loaded with the crops would take the crops down the canal to the Scuppernong River, and there larger vessels would receive these crops. The canal also provided a source of water power, and this water power fed 2 sawmills and a grist mill. I think you can skip to and so the 2 sawmills and the grist mill were built by enslaved and free carpenters a few years after the plantation got started. The canal also provided water irrigation through a very complex system of ditches that enslaved workers were forced to dig on the property and that connected with the canal. And the irrigation was needed because enslaved workers initially were growing rice. So Somerset Place was a rice plantation and a lumber plantation initially. But I think you skipped it. But starting in the 1820s, we know that enslaved field workers of Somerset, they had to cultivate corn, wheat, cotton, potatoes, peas, and a couple other different things. I think you skipped it. Now, ultimately, Josiah Collins I, one of the 3 business partners that formed the Lake Company, essentially took sole ownership of the Somerset Place plantation. And then in 1816, Josiah Collins I named the plantation Somerset Place. And he named it after his birthplace that was in England, a place called Somersetshire. But Josiah Collins I died a couple years later. Then Somerset was inherited by his son, Josiah Collins II. And Josiah Collins II, continued where his father had left off. Josiah Collins II continued to have the plantation expand. And so when we get to the year 1829, for instance, there's now more than 50 buildings on this property. And these buildings included houses, barns, stables, shops for craftspeople, enslaved craftspeople working on the plantation. And also in that same year, the enslaved labor force had now grown to a population of 220 men, women, and children, thus necessitating or making necessary additional houses for this enslaved. So the earlier slave dwellings were built, very early on in plantation's history. They were 2-story, 4-room houses similar to those. And then in the 1820s, during Josiah II's ownership, he had these smaller single-family houses constructed. Now, Josiah Collins II, he's doing, he's really preparing the plantation for his son to not only own it, but also to come and live at Somerset Place. And his son was Josiah Collins III. Josiah Collins III moved to Somerset Place with his wife, a woman named Mary Riggs. She was from New Jersey. They moved to Somerset Place in 1830. Josiah Collins III was the first resident owner of Somerset. So the previous people were absentee owners. They lived in but Josiah married had 6 kids. They served their family at Somerset Place. And Josiah Collins III inherited Somerset Place when his father, Josiah II, passed away in 1839. And I would say from that moment on, Somerset became one of the largest and one of the most productive plantations and planters' estates in North Carolina. Planters' estate being the fact that it was the home of the owners of the property. And so while, I like to think of the plantation in terms of having 2 stories. One story was the story of the Collinses and their lifestyles. The other story, though, was this lifestyle was born on the backs of hundreds of enslaved workers that were forced to live on this property. In 1860, just a year prior to the Civil War starting, Somerset was home to 328 enslaved workers. Josiah Collins III ranked third among slave owners by that metric in North Carolina. So this plantation really relied on, enslaved labor. In the state of North Carolina at this time, along with other southern states, they made laws that permitted free people to enslave Africans and African Americans solely based on the color of their skin. This was a race-based form of slavery that was in place. Instead, under the law, enslaved people were considered to be property. They served as collateral on bank loans. Enslaved people were inherited by members of the free class. Josiah Collins III, being a wealthy plantation owner, saw enslaved people as a business investment. And so I would say a lot of his interactions with the enslaved community tended to revolve around this idea of protecting his investment and also controlling his investment. For one, Josiah Collins III provided food, clothing, and housing to enslaved workers. He also had a plantation hospital established, with the whole point of that, of course, being to get enslaved workers healthy enough to resume work. Then lastly, you can skip to the next one. And then the last thing Josiah did, again, to protect and to control his business investment was to establish a rewards and punishment system to extract enslaved people's labor from them. And he also controlled varied aspects of their domestic lives. If an enslaved person met Josiah III's expectations, he or she was rewarded with certain things. And also, one of them was a Christmas pass, given out only to certain enslaved workers that allowed them to go visit their relatives and but if an enslaved person did not meet Josiah III's expectations, he or she was punished, and that job fell to the plantation's overseers. And these punishments included, forms of violence, whippings, beatings, floggings. Josiah Collins III also withheld food rations from enslaved workers that wouldn't submit to his will. The most severe punishment Josiah implemented at Somerset Place was to sell an enslaved person and separating them from their family and loved ones back at the plantation. And yet, despite all these ways Josiah tried to control the lives of enslaved people at Somerset Place, you can skip to the next one. They still tried to find ways living at the plantation to take this control back. And they would do this in a couple of different ways. Enslaved people at Somerset, for instance, they committed acts of defiance and resistance. These actions varied in scope. It could be something as simple as breaking a tool, to at least in one purported incident, a group of enslaved people being suspected of plotting to poison Somerset's overseer. Enslaved people at Somerset Place, they also self-emancipated. They liberated themselves from the plantation in an effort to find freedom. Enslaved people at Somerset started families. And ultimately what resulted was just an enormous network of kinship that's all across North Carolina to this day, as well as across the entire United States. Enslaved people preserved African and Afro-American cultural practices. And overall, enslaved people at Somerset, they did anything they could to feel a sense of pride, a sense of dignity, and a sense of humanity in this inhumane system. I guess we'll wait to have questions at the very end. But that concludes my talk about Somerset. Thank you.
So we're going to transition over to the Hurry-Scurry portion of it. And This is when Josiah Collins was preparing to mass migrate half of his enslaved population in response to the war. My initial interpretation for those who were there in February was that Hurry-Scurry was a purpose-built plantation. After some reflection, I kind of adjusted. Hurry-Scurry was meant to sort of house, in a way, his enslaved population in Franklin County that was insulated from the larger scale of the war. After he had arrived here, he determined that it was opportunistic to ideologically support the Confederate cause. Collins had bought 574 acres of land, which is a very large portion of property here in Franklin County, and moved 184 of his enslaved community 110 miles from the west, or from the east to the west, in October of 1862. By the time that they had arrived, there were no established housing, no form of food, no form of medical care. They had to build it all from scratch and essentially create a self-sustaining system to support the enslaved community. This, toward the middle of 1863, would become a medical crisis for Hurry-Scurry. The evidence that I found going through archival records to support that Collins was reinforcing his Confederate ideologies was sending enslaved to the Gaston-Raleigh railroads, sending it to the Peace Pettigrew Hospital, and then the Wilmington fortification. Hurry-Scurry's plantation was not a financial endeavor in any cause. As we're going to see later on, he lost more money than he would make. He sent 37 enslaved people over to the Raleigh and the Gaston Railroad. They were there for about a year. He made about $90,000 of equivalent USD for his enslaved community that worked there, and then he used that money to buy resources to begin to build a self-sustaining system. Those resources would end up being used to create a textile manufacturing system that he would make goods for the nearby Confederate outfits that were in the region. He would then send a few of his enslaved to the Peace and Pettigrew Hospital. The names listed here. This is Augusta Anna Calvarus with her husband, I believe, James Calvarus. This was provided from Somerset Place. We don't know exactly what they were doing at the hospital, but from contemporary sources, it's likely that they were just doing laundry, cleaning up after some of the nurses, and maybe doing light medical care under direct supervision. Yes, ma'am.
Is Somerset Place in Cabarrus County?
No, it's in
It's
Washington
in
County.
Washington.
We only have one record of an individual going to Wilmington, but there are several letters of important political figures asking Collins to help with fortifications. The plantation production. It was divided into two different aspects: the Gain Labor Task Force and then the Specialized Skill Task Force. The Gain Labor Task Force, and this directly mirrors what was happening on Somerset Place. The Gain Labor Task Force would go out into the field, they would grow the crops, they would till, they would cut down lumber, and they would bring all of the raw materials back, and then the Skilled Labor Task Force would create the specialized means and goods. And then that specialized means and goods would go out into the Confederate supply chains. Some of it would stay in-house to support the workforce and labor force, but most of it seemed as though it was going out to the Confederate demand nearby. Here we are beginning to see letters from the overseer, one of them, Bateman, and then another one you're going to see later on, Eaton. The Bateman begins to express in June of 1863 ongoing sickness. This ongoing sickness is due to the lack of standing structures and buildings. He eventually begins to talk about constructing these buildings later on. What we do know is 13% of the enslaved community ended up dying between June of 1864 or 1863 to June of 1864. 5% died from 1863 of June to 1863 of August. We're not quite sure what it was, but chlorodyne was a bulk purchase from the Collins and sent to Hurry-Scurry, and it's likely that it was malaria.
You said 13% and 5%.
13% overall, and then 5% in a small cluster.
It's about 140 people.
It was about 24 people in all, and then about 10 people in about two and a half months.
Okay.
So still like a very large portion of the community. About 1 in 8 people were dying of disease. So here are the names of the individuals who ended up passing away. Some of them, as you can see, were as young as 2 years old. Some of them as old as 35 or 56. Currently, we don't know where they were buried. We do know that they were taken care of by Reverend Gilliam at the St. John's Church, which is still standing here. I think it's right down the street.
I just need the card. Thank you.
So this is when Bateman, in March of 1863, began to build the cabins for the body, or for the enslaved community. He doesn't specify where they are or what they're made of, only that he's building them. And this is where the archaeological research begins to develop. How we begin to develop the archaeological research and why we did it. We started off with archival records. We moved into tracing how the archival research told the story of the enslaved and how the archival research could tell where exactly Hurry-Scurry may have been in the geographical space of Franklin County. So the records through the ledgers are what allows us to know where they were sent, how much money the Collins were spending or how much money the Collins were getting. This continues on, allowing us to know, again, where they were going, what they were spending, what supplies was coming to the plantation. And then this was a cross-reference between a document from Somerset Place of the enslaved that were moved to Hurry-Scurry, and then ledgers showing those same individuals being sent to different locations.
You guys have a good night.
Here is the deed of John E. Thomas selling the tract of land to Josiah Collins in 1863, though they begin to move the community in 1862. So in order to properly triangulate everything due to the lack of historical maps and documentation of Franklin County, we were able to find a 1920s map, overlay it with a map plat from the 1920s as well, and then use LIDAR, which is a light detection radar, and find the key geographical points that were in the original deed, the sweet gum tree, the polythene branch. Here's the polythene branch right here that is referenced in this 1920s deed. The sweet gum tree as well right here. And then the most important part is this Cobb's Crossroad. This 1920s map specifically talks about the Cobb's Crossroad. Using these geographical boundaries, we were able to pinpoint that this general area is more than likely Hurry-Scurry. The area we decided to focus on archaeologically was right here, where there is a cluster of home buildings. It is very indicative of contemporary sources and how they described plantations being constructed in the Antebellum period right up to the Civil War. It's a little difficult to see, but the way that these buildings are is what's called a slave row. This row right here, which is now the old Highway 561, was directly built around the old Polythene Road. And it appears that the plantation was built facing that road so that it had easy access to different areas of Franklin County, easy access to Tarboro, and easy access to the railroad system, which are all major points of Hurry-Scurry's record. So again, that map, but a little bit more clear. So, the financial investment. The Collins had spent in Confederate equivalent $27,000 of 1865 period. Converting that to modern day, that's nearly $500,000. They earned $30,000. Converting that to modern day, that's $627,000. They lost nearly $60,000 trying to operate this plantation. The average farmer in the 1860s made less than 17,000 modern day dollars. Hurry-Scurry was a ginormous operation. It was huge. The average farmer didn't own any enslaved people. Those who did own enslaved people usually owned anywhere from 5 to 10. The fact that 184 enslaved people were moved from Somerset Place here to Franklin County speaks volumes of what the Collins were attempting to do initially and then opportunistically. So we're moving to the archaeology side of it. A little bit more exciting, hopefully. So these are the tests that we ran. We did 32 shovel tests. The shovel test is essentially us digging a very concise hole in the ground and measuring the depth of that hole in the ground and taking all the artifacts from that hole in the ground and recording why we did it. Very boring stuff. We did that 32 times in a very, very systematic way. And what we wanted to do was dig those holes in the ground in accordance with all of those old buildings that are no longer standing in that area. Along with that, we wanted to collect every single artifact that was already on the surface. This is an agricultural site. It's still active and being plowed to this day. So when it's plowed, a lot of the artifacts that are in the ground, a few centimeters deep, are being pulled up and being laid on the surface. So by the end of our test, which was conducted from the beginning of March to the end of March, we collected nearly 515 artifacts. For a site this small, that is a significant amount of artifacts. The caveat to this, though, is that a lot of those artifacts were fragmented. A lot of those artifacts were broken because of the plowing. So those artifacts can be more and or less once we get to the next stage of analysis, trying to mend them together. Here are some of the artifacts. We try to break it down into 3 or 4 major groups: domestic artifacts, architectural artifacts, and then others. So domestic artifacts are things that you would think of like your kitchenware, your bottles, your plates, your knives, stuff like that. Architectural is nails, glass, window glass, bricks. That tells us archaeologists a lot of really valuable information. Bottle glass. Bottle glass was pretty much all over this place, and that's really good, really important information. Nerds way smarter than me have been able to figure out manufacturing techniques based off of coloring, and using coloring, using the way that the lip of bottles have been made, we can actually date these fragmentations. And once we have dated these fragmentations and aggregate that to averages, we can actually determine the average date of this area when it first started seeing deposits of all of this junk, so to say. And ceramics, which most archaeologists get very excited about. I like bottle glass, I'm not gonna lie. I really like bottle glass. We had 56 fragments of ceramics. That's not a lot, but it was enough for us to determine what was going on. What we did find though is that whiteware was the most common ceramic. Whiteware is typically made between the 1780s to the 1830s, which seems a little weird for a site that's supposed to have been established in the 1860s. The thing though is most enslaved communities usually hold on to their ceramic goods for a very long time. So if that whiteware was given to them, or if they bought it, or if they traded for it, at the very latest it could have been made, they may have held on to it from Somerset Place and brought it over to Hurry-Scurry. And then architecture. Architecture tells us if something was built there and when something was built there. I know it looks like junk, but this is bricks and this is nails. And depending on the way that bricks are made, and if it's non-homogeneous and other key indicators, you can actually tell how old a brick is. Same with nails. That nail is actually a mid-19th century nail. Cut nails were actually created right around the time of the Civil War. The nails that we use today, their grandfather was made right around the time of the Civil War. We found almost entirely nothing but those kind of nails on this site. Putting all that together, and in certain areas, we were able to determine that this site does indeed date to the 1860s. It's huge, it's super important. So we took all of our artifacts and the geospatial data that we collected while we were digging up those holes, and we aggregated that data. When we did so, we were able to determine two key locations. This is the center of the site, where most of the historically documented buildings are, and then this is where that bigger building is. I'm not going to get into the weeds of this very complicated test that we ran, but essentially what that very complicated test that we ran came back and said, this bigger building that we believe to be the overseer's home had 33% kitchen artifacts and 60% architectural artifacts. And then this had 60% kitchen artifacts and 33% architectural artifacts. I've been talking for a while, so now I'm going to ask you guys a question. Why is that important and significant, and what do you think that means?
More people in the houses in the middle.
Okay. Why do you think that?
They needed more kitchenware and smaller buildings.
Okay. Why do smaller buildings, I'm going to try to tease this out. Why do smaller buildings have less architecture, though?
It's not as fancy.
It's not as fancy. Okay. All right. Let's move back to the bigger building. Why would the bigger building have less kitchenware but more architectural stuff?
Houses during that time period didn't have the kitchen in the house. The kitchen was outside of the house.
Okay. Well, this is encompassing like all of those smaller possible kitchens that you're talking about. So these are two separate zones, right? So if this is calculating for all four of those, right? And this is calculating for that one house that might also include that kitchen area. But we have 60% kitchen, 33% kitchen. Why might that be?
Most of the cooking and preparation of food was going on in the purple area.
This one?
Yeah.
Like more communal cooking more than individual.
There you go. That's what I was teasing out. That's yes, 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 yes. And that's huge. It shows that there's some sort of social difference happening in this area. What that social difference is, we can't say yet. There's more testing that we need to do. There's more archaeology that needs to be done if we get to that stage. But what we have done so far is giving us patterns and indications that there is some form of a social difference happening within this area. Yes.
Is it perhaps because they had less oversight? They were able to have more freedom in a sense?
Maybe, we don't know.
Okay.
But typically, if we were to make a hard judgmental leap and say that this is the plantation, and this is where the enslaved were, enslaved communities typically have very not so nice homes. And those very not so nice homes require less building materials. But enslaved communities do have relative access to material goods. So because there's a lot of people in a small congested area, there's usually going to be a higher percentage of domestic goods and a lower percentage of architectural signatures because of the fact that their homes aren't built with a lot.
So did you find evidence that they did build houses for them, or are they basically living in an encampment?
No. Yes, the architecture, like that, those signs are showing that something was built here. This is called GPR data, ground penetrating radar, and what we did is that we overlaid all of our bricks where we found bricks, and what it shows is that there's a ginormous concentration of bricks on one of the quarters, and next to that are very high concentrations of subsoil features. Now, this subsoil feature, we can't tell exactly what it is until we go out there, we open up a test unit, if we ever get to that, and we actually dig it all up. But the fact that there's this high concentration of a subsoil feature, of a scatter, and we found a lot of bricks in this general area, that correlative patterning indicates that there is more brick material. And because it aligns with that historic map as well, and it's also showing signs with the nails and the window glass too, we can say with confidence that there was some form of a building in that area.
How deep were you finding these artifacts?
Anywhere from 10 to 40 centimeters deep, which is usually where we would expect there to be artifacts. And then we were also finding artifacts on the surface as well because of the plow. Yes. Yeah. So, with all of that being said, the archival records and the archaeological records seem to be converging in a positive direction to make a confident claim that this is the site. But we can't jump to that conclusion until we're able to do further archaeological investigations and actually find what is called a subsurface soil feature. Once we are able to do that, I have no idea when that'll be or if that'll ever be, then we are going to be able to be a little bit more confident with our assertion. But as of now, the conclusions of our data is giving us a strong indication that we can do more positive investigations. So, any questions?
What's the most exciting thing you found?
It was a button.
A
Oh,
button?
wow.
I found a button. Yes.
Did it have any markings or?
It did. It was a rubber galvanized button from anywhere between 1850 to 1890, which means it's due to the rest of the context of the assemblage, likely from the 1860s, and due to the there you go back. Due to how much buttons were bought here, I wish I actually put the actual number. There was a lot of buttons that were bought. We know that there were buttons. There were a lot of buttons. So yes, I was excited to see the button.
So do you have any evidence of any occupation of the area after the war?
Yes, yeah. A man by the name of Robert H. Strickland lived there. He lived there from anywhere between 1890 to 1920.
And he continued to farm it?
I don't believe he farmed it. No, I don't think farming happened until sometime in the 20th century.
Would you say that, I'm just assuming the farming of this property is basically saved it from, a Walmart being there? If a Walmart was there, you couldn't have found anything.
I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know.
I mean,
I have no idea. I couldn't tell you.
because, if there had been development there, then that would have
Well,
included any.
North
research.
Carolina laws dictate that anytime land is going to be disturbed or dug up, that archaeology has to happen anyway. So somebody would have came out, seen all that, they would have dug it up. Would they have had? Would they have had the archival strings attached to it? I don't know.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have known the history of what they were looking at, like what you know
Right.
at this point.
But
Yeah.
so, yes.
All right, so I didn't know any of this story. This is amazing. I love it. It seems like y'all are coming fresh off of it with a lot of raw data. Do you have, can I have this PowerPoint presentation? I'm a teacher. So do you have this written anywhere, somewhere less raw?
I am pursuing my master's, and this is going to be my thesis.
Okay.
So I am working with the state. I'm working with Somerset Place and Somerset Foundation to make sure that all of this is as accessible as I possibly can, while also protecting the privacy of the property owner. So
And your research, of course.
yeah, sure. I'm trying to be more concerned and transparent with the accessibility of the data. So I guess after this, I can give you my contact information, and as soon as I have that in a more accessible format for everybody, then yeah, absolutely.
What's your next step?
Right now, it's just I have to finish the report. We have the collection curated at the North Carolina Office of State Archaeology, and once the report is finished and concluded, we are going to attempt to move for some sort of formal recognition and or nomination of the site itself in whatever ways that's congruent with both the descendant community and the property owner, try to make everybody as happy as possible. So yes, ma'am.
Did you have trouble getting access to the site?
In what way?
Like the owner, I'm assuming he had to stop farming.
I worked with the owner, and we were able to make things happen before farming happened.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So I didn't make it to the first presentation. So how did this all come about? How did you even learn?
I was an archaeology student at UNC for my undergrad, and during then, my mentor introduced me to Somerset Place to study one thing. Ended up reading a book by a woman named Dorothy Sproul, and she talked about it. She talked about Hurry-Scurry, it just became a rabbit hole.
Okay.
Here we are now.
Yeah, I didn't realize. I mean, I've never heard of Hurry-Scurry, so I'm thinking this is coming out of.
Nobody's heard of Hurry-Scurry.
Okay.
This is like new history.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm very confused about the name. They actually named it Hurry-Scurry?
Yeah, they named it Hurry-Scurry, and
I mean, it's just so obvious that they're hurrying and scurrying to hide their
Yeah.
slaves.
They were in a hurry.
Right, who gave it the appellation?
it was a that they named it Hurry-Scurry. In
Yeah.
every single archival record where it's mentioned, where it's talked about, it's called Hurry-Scurry.
Was that attributed to the Collinses?
I'm sorry.
Did Collins themselves give it?
Yes. Yep.
I'm assuming.
Like in their ledger, it's called Hurry-Scurry. In the letters, it's called Hurry-Scurry. Literally everywhere, it's called Hurry-Scurry. Yeah. All right.
So the at Somerset, you said there was in 1863 Burnside came down into North Carolina. I don't remember that.
1862.
1862.
Yeah.
So what happened to the remaining? What happened to Somerset?
So during the war, I forgot the amount, but there was a group of enslaved people that had to stay at Somerset while the 100 some odd went to Hurry-Scurry. They tended to be the elderly or maybe sick or infirm, or those that the Collinses trusted. And there was an overseer that was, or more than one overseer, I think, that was there during the course of the war. The resident minister on the plantation that preached in a chapel that was in the enslaved community, he also stayed at Somerset Place, but I think he soon left, and that was George Patterson. But what was interesting was that starting in the summer of 1862, the Union Army began visiting Somerset Place. When the Union Army, I guess, took control of Plymouth, what started to happen was a lot of people were fleeing into the town of Plymouth, including a lot of enslaved people from the surrounding area. And that, to my understanding, created a sort of food crisis. And so a group of Union soldiers from Plymouth came over to Somerset Place to essentially get corn and other materials to feed the growing number of people coming to Plymouth. And so, at first the Union Army, they encouraged the enslaved people. We have it in our documents. They, probably subtly encouraged enslaved people to pursue their freedom. But that became official in January of 1863. And we know from letters that it was either at the end of January or early February 1863, the Union Army came to Somerset Place specifically to tell the enslaved people that they were now free and that they did not have to listen to or take orders from the overseer. So that's what we were saying, or rather you were saying earlier in the presentation, that, while there were newly free people at Somerset Place during the Civil War, those at Hurry-Scurry still were enslaved. And there was only a difference of, like 100 miles or something.
110.
110.
Yep.
And so, that's, that's at least some of the things that took place at Somerset. Oh, we probably forgot to mention too. Let me mention too that the Collinses, they moved to Hillsborough.
Oh, Hillsborough.
They moved to Hillsborough during the Civil War. They stayed at a place called the Burwell School. It's called the Burwell School now, but that was where the Collins family basically lived at during the Civil War. They left Somerset Place in spring of 1862.
I think that's a famous wartime strategy called GTFO.
Yeah.
So is that, do you have any evidence that they splintered other groups as well? Or were they all just sent to, was Hurry-Scurry a unique situation, or did they splinter them in different areas?
From what I understand, in North Carolina, this is the only evidence of mass migration of this size happening, but it was also happening in places like Texas. It was happening in places like Georgia, but this was relatively unique for North Carolina, and we're quite uncertain why as of yet. We're still looking for other archival records. GTFO.
I will say, I think that, so at Somerset Place, the Collinses had neighbors, and the neighbors were the Pettigrew family. And I think it was William Pettigrew, he owned one of the 3 Pettigrew plantations. I think he did something similar with enslaved people that, were at Magnolia, his plantation. He took them somewhere. I forget where it was, but that was another example of migration, albeit the enslaved population at Magnolia Plantation, it was nowhere near the population that was at Somerset Place.
You had a question?
Yes, I wanted to know, is there any evidence or any written documents anywhere in archives that I can look for? What was the response of the enslaved people when it was time to switch over from I had to obey to I'm free to go? What was their account? How did what was it like? Is there anything written that I can see? Like, was that a shock? And it's like, what do we do now? Like, what was that like for on the slave side? Is there anything written?
There's a famous case, Uriah Bennett. He talked a bit about it. You could look on the Library of Congress, and it's the Library of Congress.
Farm Security Administration papers.
What was that?
The Farm Security Administration papers.
I think that's what it was. There was in the 1930s. There was interviews conducted of former enslaved Black Americans, and Uriah Bennett's one of the more famous ones that I know of because he was at Somerset Place. He was a young boy, and he talks a lot about his experience at Somerset Place. The Library of Congress has a lot of
Audio?
not audio, but written documents.
Okay.
Yeah. And furthermore,
what would I look up when I Google it under Library of Congress and I get in?
It's former enslaved interviews.
Okay.
yeah.
And it's broken down by states as well. So
Nice.
Yep.
Okay, good.
And furthermore, if you read Somerset Homecoming by Dorothy Sproul Redford, I think she talks a little bit, from the research that she's done about the response as well. But going back to what you were saying about Uriah Bennett, he actually addresses that very thing that you're asking about in his oral history. And he said, I forgot the exact quote, but he says something to the effect of, when we were free, we were not paid at all for our work. We came back to the same old place that they carried us from.
Yep.
And so, it still kind of shows, like, even though they were free, they still had a lot of challenges to face.
if you want another site to look at to explore that, Stagville is very Stagville Plantation. Stagville, yes.
Okay.
It's in Durham.
It's in Durham.
Yep. They had a really similar history, sort of kind of to Hurry-Scurry, or Hurry-Scurry had a similar history to Stagville, where they began in the Antebellum period with a heavy enslaved shadow slavery population and everything, and then moved over to sharecropping. Yeah. So that's a good place to look at. Yep.
And is there, I know that I went to the NC archives. I know they have a list of the ships that came, not all of them, but the ones they do have, they have it listed. They have a list of as objects, what was on every ship from Africa. All those, in those archives, will I be able to find things that are newer, up to date, as you guys are doing your archaeological stuff?
Eventually, it's all a process. It takes time. Yep.
Yeah.
So as soon as this is readily available, I'm going to be working with Scott and the library here to make sure that my report is going to be accessible for Franklin County and Washington County as well, everywhere that it's involved, but it's just a process.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you all for coming out. We very much greatly appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you.
I got brochures about Somerset Place if you'd like to have.
No, we'll find out.
Just gonna put them right here.
Thanks. Thank you guys for doing what you do.
You're welcome. Thank you.